Welcome back to the Social Impact Level Up podcast. This is where we blur the lines between business, nonprofit, and impact. I'm your host, Wendy V, and I'm a social impact strategist here to help you build a successful and sustainable legacy of social change. In this week's episode, we're going to hear from a social entrepreneur who has been on a journey to change the world just like you. If you are interested in social entrepreneurship, this is the place for you. Let's jump right into this week's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Social Impact Level Up podcast. We are here with Kat. And Kat, remind me how to say your last name.
Luckock.
Luckock. Okay, I didn't want to say it wrong. So Kat is here all the way from the other side of the pond, and I am so excited to have her. You're in Wales, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well
Yeah.
remembered.
Yeah, I didn't get it wrong. I remembered. And so I, found Kat online. We weren't
Yep.
even real in life friends, but I aspired to go visit her in Wales one day. And we bonded over this idea of being social impact strategists. So a lot of the times you'll see people with the same title, they don't actually collaborate. This is completely the opposite because Kat and I instantly were like, you do the same thing that I do. You like the same things that I like. Wait, hold on. We should be friends. And
Yeah.
so we've been trying to connect and have this podcast episode for quite a long time. So I'm excited to invite you here and have this conversation with you. And I wanted, the audience to really understand that this isn't a common title people choose, social impact strategist. It's really, I'm sure if you're committed to a certain frame of mind, then you're drawn to this. But a lot of people don't even know what the heck we're talking about. So I really wanted to start with your story of how
Yeah.
you came to be a social impact strategist and what exactly that means for you.
Oh, I love that question. No, thank you. So, I suppose I came to it after becoming a social entrepreneur back in 2013. So, I set up with my friend and co-founded a social enterprise, which runs an education program in schools. Maybe we'll come back and talk about that later. But um, after that, well, I did that for 3.5 years. And then I really wanted to, I didn't want to leave it, but I decided in the end to leave it on the operational side. I'm still involved and have been for the last 10 years as a director. I really wanted to then go and help other social entrepreneurs grow their businesses. And so I knew what I wanted to help them with in terms of communicating their social impact better, measuring their social impact better, and generating more revenue. Because I felt like the social enterprise sector as a whole wasn't generating revenue fast enough. And I really wanted to get into that space of supporting them to do that. Now I've kind of niched out my own sort of space in that space. But and at the start I was like, well, what am I going to call myself? What does somebody that's doing this work call themselves? And I kind of just made it up 5 years ago. I decided, I was like, well, I'm doing lots of impact strategy. It's helping people create their social impact. It's helping people understand what the social impact is and how they communicate that. So I think I'd probably seen somebody else use the term strategist. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I do. So social impact strategy, social impact strategist. That's how I started out. That's what stuck. That's evolved lots now. And I kind of more call myself a social enterprise coach and strategist. But yeah, that's where it started. And so for me, I think it was always just about, um, I think social enterprise owners, founders, leaders always have a strategy, but sometimes it's in their head, and it's maybe quite vague, or they've got a very clear vision. They have very clear ideas about how they want to run their business and operationalize their social impact and value. But very rarely, in my experience, have that as an actual strategy. And I think after that initial passion and commitment has sort of played out, they've got a business up and running, and they've got different parts to the operations. They've got new team members and everything. They realize, things aren't quite working as streamlined as they were. And I find it's often because they're lacking that strategy, really kind of formalizing it and using it to help them operationalize their business and grow their business. So I think for me, social impact strategy is having a social impact strategy that's aligned to your business strategy, your sales strategy, your revenue strategy, whatever that is. And also, the bit that I've really developed with clients is thinking about, well, you've got this vision for the social impact you want to be creating, got a plan for how you're going to create it, but what are you also doing to evaluate whether you're actually creating that impact and improving on it as well, and then reporting
Yeah.
on it. So yeah,
Yeah.
that
It is, it is.
that wasn't a nutshell, was it?
No, it is. I mean, it's funny because I think that people who are really into social impact understand that cycle. It's just the
Mm,
continuous quality improvement cycle that you would
yeah.
do with any impact-based organization. But it's hard to do it to yourself, right?
Yes.
Like it is hard, I think, when people are saying, and this is one of the reasons why people hire me as well, is like, hey, I can only do so much in the job that I have, but when I'm completely in charge and I make all of the decisions, it's a little bit different, and sometimes you do need that support. So I imagine that you've run into that also as people who were like, "Yeah, I do this for my 9 to 5, or I've done this for other people, but when I went to do it for myself, it suddenly became difficult." And have you experienced
Yeah.
that before too?
Yeah. And I've experienced that for myself, and had to go and seek out somebody else to help me with my own business strategy, because I think when you're in it, sometimes it's just hard to get through, like, all the ideas you've got. And also, I think the hardest part I find, and I found with clients, is almost the feeling of restricting yourself by putting it down in a framework or on paper. It's like, oh, I can never change the plan if I've written it down as a plan. And like we know that's not true. Like it's a structure to work by, but it's flexible. You can evolve it, and it will change. It's not going to be as written, but some element of us that really struggles with, yeah, those are the things I'd like to do, and those are the things I know need to happen to make that, but I don't want to put it on paper because that kind of like restricts me somehow. And I think a lot of social entrepreneurs are much more free flowing and creative and spontaneous. And so there's a kind of a bit of a jarring there with strategy and this spontaneity. And I think for anybody that feels that, I am definitely that kind of person too. And just know that having a strategy really, really does help. Like it just helps exactly what you should be doing week in, week out, and day in, day out if you've got the really good plan. And I've really seen it with clients work really well as in my own business, where, rather than just almost firefighting and dealing with the next thing, or just being really busy working, but not actually moving towards where you want to get to, really, just kind of
Yeah, the
in.
busy being busy, but not necessarily getting to your goal.
Exactly.
I've actually done that before, and my coach caught me and was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know, I'm doing stuff every day." And she's like,
Yeah,
"You can do a lot of stuff every day,
exactly.
the right stuff." But I'm like,
Are you
"I don't know."
moving the needle to get to where you want to get to? So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you said something about measuring that too. A lot of the times people forget to measure things, or they don't start early enough at like 0, and so they're already doing stuff and they're like, "Oh, well, does this count?" And they try to go backwards, and it is difficult, for yourself even to just set up the
Mm.
systems that you need to keep consistently doing things to move forward and also measure at the same time. So I can see how, people need help. And you mentioned before that you guys had started an organization as social entrepreneurs before you even did this. I know you still work with that organization. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about, like, what does this organization do and what is their
Mhm.
mission and how can people, support if they're interested?
Yeah, no, definitely. So Solutions to the Planet, you can check it out. It's solutionstotheplanet.co.uk. It's so we're passionate about helping young people predominantly. Well, we have a number of different programs, but our main program helping 11 to 14-year-olds understand sustainability and the climate crisis and feel empowered to create change and take action on those issues. And so it's a year-long program working with young people in secondary schools, where we initially do a big day with them where they kind of learn about the sustainability issues. They pick an issue in their teams that they want to focus on, and then they create what we call a big idea. And they're supported by our business mentors throughout the academic year to progress that idea into a business plan and a presentation. And they go through various stages of our competition and presenting their big idea and developing it. So they're developing lots and lots of STEM skills and 21st century skills that they need, alongside this, practical project that they've created and are inspired to create an impact around. Um, and then we have our best bit, I think, really for the young people. There's so many good bits around the program, but our finalists get to present in Parliament in summer each year to their local MPs, members of parliament, and also their families and the teachers and everything. So we have a really big celebration event there at the end of the year as well. We have other programs as well now that is around bringing youth voice into big corporates, so into gas and energy suppliers, and others that we're exploring at the moment. So that's another big thing for us. It's really about bringing young people and business together and recognizing that youth voice in industry. As stakeholders, as future business customers and future employers as well. And that recognition that young people just have this ability to see the world differently. They're not constrained by all the things that they've been educated out of, like to, worry about budgets and worry about health and safety. And not to say that those things aren't important, but I think young people often bring just a different, lighter perspective to things, of real creativity, which is certainly what our business partners have found and why they invest in the program. So yeah, if you've
Yeah.
got out there that are interested, then definitely get in touch.
That's really neat. And so this is based in Wales.
No,
Or
no, no. We're
oh,
based in England, and we run the Big
okay.
Ideas program across England, and have been in
Okay.
Scotland in the past, but not in Wales at all. No.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. So you are like in a couple countries with this program. Awesome. That's great. And so the program when you're talking about bringing youth voice into this, I think that's a really important part that we skip a lot of the times in social impact work because we do these programs or we work with schools or we do whatever with young people and then we give them like a box for their solution or we give them
Yeah,
a framework or something that they have to work within and what you're kind of providing is just you're facilitating the relationship there for them to be almost unstructured once they arrive and give whatever it is they're going to contribute. And I think that's really empowering for young people to be able to come in almost like eliminating barriers for them to be able to share these ideas and get experience. And this is stuff that they can then, take to their college applications or to their job, interviews or things later. And it's such a cool skill. So do you find what kind of outcomes do you find for the youth that participate in this program?
but I think the big thing is, and this is what the core program was always about, was around helping, like, give the opportunity for young people to see how their science, technology, engineering, and math skills could be applied in the real world.
Mhm.
And yeah, with that unstructuredness. And I think it's that, for me, one of the big things is like them exploring and being creative, trying out scientific methods and things like that, but allowing for failure as well, like knowing that failure is part of that scientific and engineering approach, or and design approach. And um it's kind of allowing them to learn, fail, learn again, try something new, work as a team. There is so many different, we struggle every year to kind of decide what to focus on in terms of measuring social impact because there's so many different things. But one of the big things is around creativity. Like, it's allowing so much of education, I think, certainly here in the UK these days, doesn't allow for that creative thought. Um, and certainly, I think later on in the education system, at further and higher education and stuff, you're there to learn in lots of areas anyway, lots of subjects. You're there to learn knowledge and then apply that knowledge. And we see it all the time, right? In a lot of our business partners have said, a lot of their graduates arrive and they just don't have any creative thought or ideas because they're trying to do everything right and like do the right thing and answer in the right way rather than being themselves and kind of, just coming up with the ideas and solutions, which increasingly, particularly around the climate crisis and all sorts of other issues that are going on, like businesses want those solutions and want sort of creative ideas and people willing to say, well, should we try this? Like, it might fail, but let's try. And so I think for us, developing young people's awareness, not only of the sustainability issues, but actually really understanding that um, different people need to be in different spaces to create the change that we need to see.
Yeah, and they need to be empowered to be able to speak up. I think when you talk about young people entering into the workplace, it makes me think of when I was young and entering into the workplace. I certainly didn't think there was any voice that I could have, like there was no
Mhm.
agency there for me. And then when I would speak up, it was often kind of like, "Oh, you're so naive, you don't know how this works, or you don't know this field, or you're not prepared." Clearly that comment means you're not prepared to XYZ, just all of the different things that come with ageism. And it's interesting because if we look at the definition of ageism, it actually only applies to people in their older phases of
Yeah.
life and not the other way. And I always say, "Oh no." we
Yeah.
do a really bad job empowering young people to come up with solutions or to voice their, whatever their thoughts are in an open forum. And
Mhm.
so, it takes years before people get comfortable with that kind of stuff. But imagine how much we're missing out on, 10 years of someone's, thoughts that could have be out in the world, and we're just not giving them the space. And so what you're saying is, let's provide the vehicle for people to have this space and come up with the solutions. And even if there is failure there, or there's other things that come later, let's not worry about that and taper taper before we actually do something.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as a coach now, I see it all the time, people who haven't used their or have thought and learned that using their voice isn't a possibility or shouldn't be a thing or it needs to be quieted down and all of those things. So yeah, definitely. I think it's so important that we're nurturing that and empowering young people to be for the
Yeah.
level they're becoming as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right with the coaching piece too, because I do both the coaching and the consulting like you do, and it's really hard when you have people who have been trained that they're subscribing to somebody else's thoughts, or they're somebody else's mission or someone else's
Yeah.
expectations, and then when they come and try to say, "Oh, I'm going to do my own thing," there's all kinds of barriers to making decisions, committing to what you've decided, like you were saying, strategic planning and then following a plan and then altering a plan if needed. Like all of those
Yeah.
things come up if you're not used to using your voice and your own thoughts and your own creativity and originality. So I think sometimes, we might have learned that young and then carried it with us later. I don't know if you've seen that too.
Right. Yeah.
I've seen that in my journey.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, so we have to change all that and that's the impact we can make, I think, for a whole generation of people. So yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're an awesome coach. I'm excited.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And so with what you're doing now, you said you had niched down within the social impact sort of space. And I know that I've been following you because you are working on specifically sales,
Mhm.
and that which I'm interested in learning. So I think other people might be interested in hearing about that too. Can you say, like, how did you decide to niche down, and then what, you arrived at sales as the aspect that you wanted to focus on? Like, how did that look for you? And then what are you helping people with?
Well, it wasn't a natural process for me, I think, finding that actually sales was the thing I needed to help people with. Um, so I think on my journey of, like I said, starting out in terms of helping people think about how they communicate their impact better so that they could secure more. I thought initially more grant funding because that was my background. Like I just thought like if you're, that was what I knew. If you are able to communicate the difference you're going to make for a funder or, for the people that you're benefiting, obviously, you're more likely to be successful with those grant funding applications. And I then experienced through Solutions to the Planet how, in a similar way, doing that with corporate partners, because we were very keen to um, sell our programs to them, I then buy it in as a service rather than ask for sponsorship. Um, but it was similar in a similar way. Like it wasn't just about communicating our social impact, but actually matching our social impact to their needs as a client. But it was similar in terms of how you do that with grant funding as well. And then it kind of evolved. So the more and more workshops and trainings I did with groups of social enterprises, the more and more I realized I was mentoring and coaching around money and mindset and people's issues with paying themselves or charging appropriately. And I have conversations over and over again around pricing and why people were undercharging and why they needed to be charging more or better. And why that was important for their business sustainability and just growth, or not even growth, just to survive. So, and I think for a few years, I was like, why is it always coming back to this? What is it about people that are struggling with this? And then I kind of looked outside the sector and was like really fascinated by all these coaches and gurus, I suppose, talking about money mindset. And I was like, ah, this, what they're talking about is exactly the same. It applies here. It's like lots of entrepreneurs struggle with this, but it's a real issue in the social impact space. And I just felt, well, nobody else is talking about this in this niche where I'm already established. And I don't know who else is going to talk about it. And if I don't, like people are asking me, I need to kind of fill this gap. And like I was uncomfortable with it because I was like, who am I to kind of explore this and develop it? But it's kind of evolved over time. So I very much focused on the pricing side and exploring for myself, like why people needed to charge better and more and why we should be confident about charging more as social entrepreneurs. And that's really evolved then to, focusing on sales, because that was the next thing, right? Then people were like, well, and I'd always talked about generating revenue through selling and sales and selling services, but I hadn't really gone to the depth of like, well, what does sales really look like for social entrepreneurs? And so this whole thing then around, because I tried every other sales expert's approach, it wasn't really working for me. And I really helped people it wasn't working. I was like, why isn't it working? And essentially I've come to this conclusion: it doesn't work because as social entrepreneurs, we all have different values, but we all have a set of values. We have a purpose, and that is what drives us. And if those values aren't embedded in your sales approach, then obviously there's going to be a disconnect. And obviously it's not going to feel comfortable. And therefore, like most social enterprises, we just pretend we don't need to do it. Or we kind of try every other means of generating revenue because sales isn't for us, because that's that thing that other people that have different values to us do. And that kind of plays out in all sorts of different ways. But for me, it's been really, really interesting journey over the last 18 months to 2 years, kind of exploring my own approach to having an aligned sales approach and then helping others, because it's the thing I'm most passionate about now, because I see it as such an issue in preventing people from generating the revenue that they absolutely could be generating. And actually, it's really quite a simple process of embedding your values and feeling and taking and developing your own sales approach that does just feel fully aligned, and like kind of forgetting about what you think sales should be. Like we get to redefine sales basically.
Yeah, yeah, because people will tell you, "Oh, if you go and follow an email marketing guru, the 3 emails are gonna be your, savior to sales." And then if you follow somebody who does lives, they're like, "Do 3 lives." And I'm like, "Why is it always 3?" It's so funny. There's I know what you mean, and you're like, follow everybody's method, and then you're like, "Well, this isn't what? It's not working." So, I
Yeah,
completely appreciate what you're saying, and I think that you're right. If the value alignment, we talk a lot about that in our first, season of the podcast. Aligning your values with what you're doing as a social entrepreneur is so important, but you never really tease it all the way out into like, well, aligning your values with how you sell and your sales methodology is also part of that. And that money mindset piece. I mean, we've done entire episodes about money mindset and how do you overcome the
yeah,
different aspects that, present themselves as you're going through your journey. And I think that there's a lot of money trauma that people have experienced. And the way I see it with the social impact space is people have also experienced professional money trauma, because a lot of the times you want to make an impact or you want to do something, but the thing that's holding you back is not having money for your budget.
yeah,
And so when you get customers in this space or you're working in this impact space, a lot of the time people will say, "Oh, well, I actually need you to help me get grant funding, but I can't pay you." Or, "Oh, I want to do this project, but I don't have the budget for it." Or, "Oh, there's no budget for support to do this, but I just want to pick your brain." And you're like, "Wait, hold on. So it's okay for me to do work unpaid for you, but it's because you're trying to do something good for somebody else." It's just like whole thing. And I had to go through at least a year of like trying to understand this, and then
yeah,
realizing that they probably are just not your an ideal customer who's aligned to where you are in the process, how you can help them. And it took a long time to just be able to give up on people, because I felt like I was truly like, "Oh, but if I don't help them for free, then they're gonna go find somebody else to help them for free."
yeah,
People who are looking for free help are gonna find free help. So I completely appreciate what you're saying, because I went through all of that on my own, and I think that the people who listen to our podcast have heard me go through that journey throughout they were like they like literally were listening as the journey was happening. So yeah, so there's probably a lot in season 1 to unpack, even with my own experience of what you're talking about, which is really funny. So I want to get back to something you were talking about earlier too, about sales and how people are like using your impact to actually show that you're, doing something, that you're doing good. This is something I talk to a lot of organizations about. It's one of my specialties as well, is how do you then take that information about what you've been able to accomplish and feed it back into your system of getting profit or getting more impact or whatever your goal is. And I'm just curious how do you explain that, or how do you teach that? How do you share that with people? Because that is something you mentioned just like briefly earlier on.
yeah, definitely. So I think, knowing, I'm sorry, knowing your knowing what your impact is the first thing. And I think lots of social enterprises, wherever they are in the journey, haven't, like you said, put in the mechanisms to actually measure that. So that, I mean, for most people, that's where you have to start. Is like, what could we be measuring? What can we go back and measure, or what can we look forward to measure? From now, so that we've got some impact data. And I think alongside that, and sometimes depending on your organization, it's, the results that you create for clients can be one or the same, or can be the same thing, or sometimes slightly different, but knowing that as well. So knowing, like, are our results for clients the same as the impact we create with beneficiaries? Or do we need to kind of do those two bits of work separately and then look at, like, how they match? So when we're creating impact here, we're also creating results for our clients, because depending on how complex your organization is or the programs you're offering, sometimes those two things aren't the same. And it took me a long time to get my head around like that as well, because we need to be communicating both of those things. Um, and then, yeah, knowing really and doing some work around knowing what your clients want and need, obviously, so that you can speak to those things that they're looking for. Because there's, my basic thing is stop trying to sell to people that don't need what you've got to sell. Like, that's a value of mine, but it's also a really basic thing when it comes to any sales. Like, one of the things I think people hate about sales professionals, and also we perceive as sales being bad, is that we feel like selling is about being pushy and persuasive. The reality is you don't need to be pushy and persuasive if you're selling something people actually want to need, like, and if they've got the budget for it. So actually, if you just started your business and started your sales on that segment of the population that is looking for what you want and need, then you're going to do well initially anyway. And then, yes, you can look at other things in the future. And there's all sorts of other stuff there to look at. But I think that's the thing, is the key thing. Um, Knowing what you do, knowing how you, the impact you create, knowing what your results are, knowing what your clients need or want, and being able to confidently communicate that. And sometimes that's just practice, right? Just practicing with friends, getting out there and being uncomfortable and doing pitches, talking to potential clients and just talking it through and getting feedback. Because it's just like anything that you have to say over and over again. It's just getting really comfortable with it, trying out different ways that it works best for you to communicate it, and seeing which bits really resonate with people. And also, I think the key thing to remember is, for some people, it's just not going to hit home. And that it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's just they're not interested. Like, and that's okay. And the more you can, rather than like upset yourself around, oh, what was it that I did wrong, that like, just learn to recognize when people don't get it and move on quicker. Because actually, so much time I've seen is wasted trying to like learn better approaches, or trying a different marketing and sales technique to convince somebody, rather than just moving on and finding the next person or organization.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because I think it's difficult sometimes when you're trying to convince people of anything. I once I realize that that's what's happening, I'm usually like, okay, I don't have time for this.
Yeah,
I gotta continue to do other things that are gonna draw the people who I actually need to me, as opposed
exactly.
to trying to convince you to change your mind. Now, I mean, I've also had people come back to me several, months later and be like, okay, now I'm ready to work with you. And it was just not the right time, before or
Yeah,
whatever. And
exactly.
so, you never know why people are saying no. But if they're saying no, I don't generally like to try to convince anybody to do it. I don't like the people trying to convince me to buy something. I'm the
No, of course. Yeah.
and
And
like,
that's like, and then it's recognizing, like, that's a value for you, rightly or wrongly, that's your value. And therefore you need to reflect that in your own approach, right? Because
yeah.
it sits well or doesn't sit well with you. And then you're going to want to work with people that share your values. So yeah.
No, absolutely. I think it's a great example for people of, how social entrepreneurship can be difficult to navigate, because we don't want to be sold to, but at the same time we have something to offer. So then we don't know how to offer it. You're like, okay, hold on.
Yeah.
But we see all these other people selling like a book about how to use a whisk, and they're, making $1 million, and you're like, this person is literally using a kitchen utensil and making $1 million on a teachable course. And
Yeah.
how are you not able to do that to, give a solution to save the world, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
really kind of ironic. But I also think that, as social entrepreneurs, people who have a passion, like you mentioned, that they're really passionate about, they will, and I included, I say they, but also mean me, will, um, give up things to follow that passion. So if it's like, oh, there's not a whole lot of profit to be made here, but I get to help somebody. Oh, I'm really excited about helping somebody. So I'm going to spend the time to do it rather than saying, like, maybe I should continue to look for another customer that,
Yeah.
is more closely aligned monetarily to my goals. Right. And so I think even I hear this in my clients too, that people are happy to give up things if it allows them to like help somebody else or to help a cause or to do something
Yeah.
good.
And I think that's important, and that's recognizing that's what's important to people, but also knowing, and I have those conversations with my coaching clients as well, right? It's like, well, it's working through what really are the priorities, because usually what we find is with those types of clients is they they are very happy and very willing to give their time, but they are also in need and wanting to have that financial support, like and backing, and grow the reserves in their business or whatever. And it's just that that's less well practiced. It's not as comfortable for them. They don't really know what they do. It doesn't give them that quick sense of gratification or, speak to what they think is the right thing to be doing because of all that shame and trauma around money potentially. And so it's kind of looking at how we rebalance that because, yeah, social entrepreneurship is about doing business differently and is about our social and environmental purpose first and foremost. But it still needs to function as a business, right? It still needs to generate revenue. And for most social enterprises, in my experience, that enterprise and revenue generation piece is the bit that they're just inexperienced in. And so it's probably the bit they don't focus as much attention on, but it's just about how do we sort of train that muscle essentially? How do we practice so that we feel more comfortable in doing it? And so it does feel more exciting and enjoyable. And that's why, as much as many people think, what sales in social entrepreneurship? That doesn't sound like a thing. But actually, I think if people found their own aligned sales approach, they would be able to just see how enjoyable sharing your services with people is, which is all you're doing,
Yeah, it's
and
just
you're
like
getting money for it in return.
your natural talents that you're using to do something good is still gonna get you paid, and that it, like, is one of the most mind-blowing moments when I learned that and when I unlocked that for people too. They're like, "Wait, what? I can do something I like and get paid? How does this work? This seems weird." But yeah, it's true, and then people will pay you to do the things that you like to do, and it's just like you need to figure out, what is the right way to do it. And I think
Definitely.
the right way is, the right way for you, not necessarily the right way if somebody else in a book told you how to do.
Yes,
And
definitely.
you can't get away from marketing and that these things, quote unquote work. There are a lot of things that
Oh,
do
yeah.
work,
You
having an
still have
email
to
list.
work.
Yeah, you still have to do the work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a part of what I think you teach people is how do you go about doing that work, but how do you kind of do it in a structured, supported way with the strategy and all of those things, which I think is great. And so I wanted to ask you, there's two more questions I have for you. One is where can people find you? So just whatever you want to share, just be thinking about that. But the other question before that is if you were to give some advice for folks who are making an impact, a lesson that you learned along the way about impact based work and social entrepreneurship, what would you want to share if you could give people just one piece of advice of who's, kind of coming up behind us as we talked about, maybe even some of the younger people
Mm.
who would be taking this work over from people like you and I who are starting to age.
Yeah. I know.
Right.
It's scary.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if I can, I'll share two things. One is um to like be wildly passionate. Like that's the best thing about, you and like what I love about the sector is incredibly inspiring and aspirational people who want to create big change in the world. Like that's great. But don't allow like those things aren't going to happen if you and your team and your employees are burnt out and ill and like have no energy left. And so looking after yourself and your team and your employees and the volunteers that you might have as well is, I think, one of the most important things that we're not doing particularly well in the sector because we all have this like, oh, but it's all right. We'll put in a bit more time or we'll put in a bit more energy or we'll just push a little bit harder because this thing really matters and it does really matter. And goodwill goes a long way and it is really important. And I know like we've all done it, but at some point we have to kind of step back and allow, like, do we really have the capacity, the resources, the energy to keep going at this rate? Because actually, if we think about, for me anyway, if I then think about, you know, our alignment to how I want to see the planet regenerate and stuff, all of that stuff, that's ingrained in how we've been brought up and our society functions, and it's not sustainable. So that's my first thing, is like really, really look at how are we really radically changing how organizations operate to support people to be their best selves and to really flourish in employment, rather than constantly being trying to like do the best thing and the next thing and stuff. Um, so happened I'd forget the other thing I wanted to mention.
Well, I'll respond and then you can
Okay.
think about the next thing. But I think that you're right. I wrote in a book chapter I released earlier in the year exactly about that. It's like, we are working so hard for someone else's mission and doing, all the things. And it's always like one more, one more, one more. But we don't take the time for ourselves to like repackage our life in a way that our well-being is first. And we are not taught to stop before burnout. We're actually, like, usually pushed all the way till it happens, and
Yeah.
then the consequences is what we, like, deal with, and then we decide to change after we see the consequences, and it's not until that part we actually kick over into that part. So I think what I hear you're saying is we're very aligned with what I say is, let's figure out how to change the infrastructure of the systems that and the expectations of the places where it's really built for people to thrive, whether they're being served or whether they work there and are serving. It doesn't matter. Both ends are important. And sometimes we forget the people who are working there in order to really help the other folks thrive. And so it's kind of like this, vicious cycle where we're like, okay, let's work ourselves into oblivion and never replenish. But you can't continue to serve others if you don't refill yourself. So you have to change something. And it's not only on a personal level, it's also the organizational level. And I think that's really, very similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that is a huge part of the social impact piece we have to do as well. Like that is social change, changing the way that we work and operate organizations for the people that are in it. So I'm glad it resonated. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm glad it made sense to you and resonated.
It does.
The other thing
Yeah.
I think linked to that then around this sort of this self-sacrifice, I suppose, mentality is this issue about money and pricing and like making sure, have you got the right revenue model for your business to sustain you and the people that are in it working for you? And so that you've got the capacity to operate that model that we've just talked about. Because all too often I see people burning out, leaving the sector, giving up on their mission because they just never really focused in on like, well, how do we generate enough revenue to make this mission a reality? And I think that's always been my kind of purpose. It's like so many organizations, so many people have got incredible organizations doing incredible work. They never focus on that revenue stuff, which has to happen in order for these great organizations to not only survive, but thrive.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's always about when you're doing the work and you think you have something and it doesn't work, then you see the disappointed and you do want to quit. I think that's something that I've seen in clients every step of the way, even as early as the vision.
Yeah.
Like, it's really hard to figure out my vision. I want to quit. And so there's always this thing that exactly what you said for social entrepreneurs. When you quit, then there's a consequence. Like something doesn't get done. And I had somebody explain it to me really recently in a way that resonated really well, and it might resonate with you as well. It was like maybe we're all here to serve a certain number of people and to reach a certain capacity to create change.
Yeah.
And if we keep ourselves small, then we only reach 100, 200, or whatever. But as we allow ourselves to flourish and we continue with that journey and our passion, then we can eventually reach those bigger groups or make a bigger impact and really have that ripple effect that we're looking for. But if you stop somewhere before you cut yourself short, you're never going to really be able to get to that bigger potential. And so I hear a lot of that in what you're saying as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's exactly that. It's just so important. So please
Yeah.
don't do that. Please look
So
at your revenue model.
don't stop is like, yeah,
Don't stop.
don't stop because your revenue model's not working is what Kat said.
Yeah, just come
Yeah.
to me or Wendy.
Yeah, I
We'll
know.
sort
Well,
it out.
definitely. Yeah, there'll be some help somewhere, right? And I think that some people too have to get over the mindset of I can do everything myself and to
Yes.
really be able to say, no, I do want to hire a coach. I do want to make this investment in myself. I don't know what's going on here. And I think somebody else could possibly bring clarity to it. So I appreciate that too, that point because people sometimes are afraid of coaching or they think it's like
Yeah.
this weird, like woo-woo thing.
It's not, guys. It's really basic and straightforward.
It's like a lot of conversations and maybe some homework.
Yeah.
But yeah, some classes, but it's not going to be super hard. But sometimes you do as a coach push people to places they're uncomfortable with,
Of
and you have
course.
to
Yeah,
do it. I
of
think that
course.
that also has a little tinge of fear in there. So I wanted to hear from you, and before we go, just because the people might be really interested in what you do, how can people best connect to you or find you if they are looking for support? And then what kinds of offerings do you have that people might be able to take advantage of?
Brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, best places to reach out to me are either on LinkedIn, where I'm Kat Luckock, Luckock, or on Instagram, where I'm also Kat Luckock coaching. Um, and then probably, yeah, we've talked about my one-to-one coaching a little bit, but if you're really interested in the aligned sales method and creating your own aligned sales approach, then I have a wonderful mastermind, which is where I both teach you ways of like rethinking how your sales can work for you in your organization, but also coaching you through group coaching and support so that you can actually get that implemented within 4 months. So the mastermind is 4 months. I have open enrollment, so you join and work at your own pace throughout that 4 months. And it
And so I was
works
going to
around,
ask, so it's
yeah,
open throughout the year,
yeah,
but the duration is 4 months.
it's 4 months. Yeah. So people work through that at their own rate and get that support for 4 months. So yeah, if you're interested in that, just reach out to me and I can send you some more information.
Yeah, and I'll put your links in the show notes so that way people can
Amazing.
access your website and your Instagram and your LinkedIn that you talked about. And we met on LinkedIn, I mean, on
Yeah.
Instagram, but we then
Yeah.
clicked on LinkedIn and shared newsletters and are doing all kinds of fun stuff. So follow us in all the places and you might see even me and Kat collaborate further
Yeah,
in other
definitely.
other venues as well besides the podcasts that we both have. And now you also have a podcast, right?
I do, yeah, the what's it called? The Creating Social Impact podcast. So yeah, we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and probably some other platforms as well. So check it out there.
Yeah, so if people are interested in podcasts and you want to hear more from Kat and hear what she has to say on her own podcast, make sure you follow that. It's Creating Social Impact Podcast, right? And it's available
Yes.
on all the major platforms to go over and find that as well. All right. Thanks, Kat, for being here. It's been so wonderful to have you. I know we were just like, let's just chat. We went all over the place, but I think it's been really
Good.
helpful. We can stick on the topics and, all of the things that we talk about here about sustainability and impact and how do you as a social entrepreneur navigate this change in how we're trying to do business? Because I think the other thing that we didn't mention was that the more that we can build social business, it's a completely different sector and different way to think about business. And creating an impact is going to be bigger if we can get more people to join us. So the more we can support, the more we can help people not decide to not follow their passion and really, with Kat's kind of support, my support, whoever you reach out to, that's what we're here to do is just make sure that you guys continue to work forward and social entrepreneurship is going to grow. So
Mm.
I'm excited to hear that you're here to help and everybody else who can access that help can reach out. I'll put your info in the show notes and we'll be connected on other platforms as well. So thanks everyone for being here today for this episode. It's been great to have Kat with us. And you can reach her in any of the ways that she mentioned, but also if you just need to DM one of us, I'll make sure that you get to Kat.
Brilliant. Thank
All
you,
right.
Wendy. It's
Yeah,
been
no
great.
worries. It's been great. All right. Bye, Kat. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Social Impact Level Up podcast. It's been awesome to interview today's guest, and I hope that you leave inspired to take action. If you're looking for any of the information we spoke about, it's probably down in the show notes. Make sure that you're checking them out and you're clicking on any of the links that seem exciting to you. If you are looking for a coach or a consultant to help you with your social impact or your sustainability, reach out to me via my website, hop on my email list, or jump into one of my programs. All of the links are below. So excited to have you as part of the collective. Make sure that you come back and join us for another episode next week.